about anything else except Christine. I can't think straight. Say whatever you're thinking. Something bothering you in particular? Little thing, but maybe it's important. What puzzles me is the first newspaper stories. Sampson paused and continued. Busby says he didn't talk to anybody the first night. Not a single person, he claims. You didn't either. Story was in the morning edition, though. It's a small island, John, I told you that. And you've seen it yourself. But Sampson kept at it, and I began to think that maybe there was something to it. Listen, Alex. Only you, Patrick Busby, and whoever took Christine knew. He called it into the paper. The kidnapper did it himself. I talked to the girl at the paper who got the call. She wouldn't say anything yesterday, but she finally told me late today. She thought it was just a concerned citizen calling. I think somebody's playing with your head, Alex. Somebody's running a nasty game on you. A game? What kind of nasty game? Who were the nasty players? Was one of them the Weasel? Was it possible that he was still here in Bermuda? On Sunday night, Patrick Busby showed up at the Belmont Hotel around 9. He asked me to ride with him out past Southampton. We haven't found Mrs. Johnson. However, a man may have witnessed the abduction. I want you to hear his story. You decide for yourself. You're a big city detective, not me. You can ask whatever questions you like, off the record, of course. The man's name was Perry Graham. He was staying in a room at the Port Royal Golf Club. We met him at his tiny apartment in the staff quarters. He was tall and painfully thin with a longish goatee. He clearly wasn't happy to see Inspector Busby or me on his doorstep. I already told him everything I saw, Perry Graham said defensively, as soon as he opened the front door of his room and saw the two of us standing there. Go away, let me be. Why would I hold back anything or— I cut him off. My name is Alex Cross. I'm a homicide detective from Washington. The woman you saw was my fiancée, Mr. Graham. May we come in and talk? This will only take a few minutes. Busby and I walked inside the room, which was little more than an alcove. The tile floors and all the furniture was strewn with wrinkled clothes, mostly underwear. A woman I know lives in Hamilton, Graham said in a weary voice. I went to visit her this Tuesday past. We drank too much wine. Stayed the evening. You know how it is. I got up somehow. Had to be at the club by noon, but I knew I'd be late and get docked some of my pay. Don't have a car or nothing, so I hitched a ride from Hamilton, out South Shore Road. Walked along near Paget, I suppose. I witnessed an accident on the roadway. It was maybe a quarter-mile down the big hill there. I saw a white van hit a woman riding a blue moped. I can't be sure, but it almost looked like the van hit her on purpose. The driver, he jumped out of the van right away and helped her up. She didn't look like she was hurt badly. Then he helped her inside the van, put the moped inside too. Then he drove off. I thought he was taking her to the hospital. Thought nothing else of it. You sure she wasn't badly hurt? I asked. Not sure, but she got right up. She was able to stand all right. There was a catch in my voice when I spoke again. And you didn't tell anybody about the accident? Not even when you saw the news stories? The man shook his head. Didn't see no stories. Don't bother with local news much. Just small-time shit and worthless gossip. But then my girl, she kept talking about it. I didn't want to go to the police, but she made me do it. Made me talk to this inspector here. You know what kind of van it was? I asked. White van. I think it was maybe a rented one, clean and new. License plate. Graham shook his head. Don't have no idea. What did the man in the van look like? I asked him. Any little thing you remember is helpful, Mr. Graham. You've already helped a lot. He shrugged, but I could tell that he was trying to think back to that afternoon. Nothing special about him. Not as tall as you, but tall. Looked like anybody else. Just a black man like any other.
In a small apartment in a suburb of Washington called Mount Rainier, Detective Patsy Hampton lay in bed, restlessly flipping through the pages of the Post. She couldn't sleep, but there was nothing unusual about that. She often had trouble sleeping, ever since she was a little girl in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her mother said she must have a guilty conscience about something. She watched a rerun episode of ER, then fetched herself a Stonyfield yogurt with blueberries and logged on to America Online. She had an email from her father, now relocated in Delray Beach, Florida, and one from an old college roommate from the University of Richmond, whom she had never been that close to anyway. The roommate had just heard from a mutual friend that Patsy was a hotshot police detective in Washington, and what an exciting life she must lead. The roommate wrote that she had 4 children and lived in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, but added that she was bored with everything in her life. Patsy Hampton would have given anything to have just 1 child. She wandered back to the kitchen and got a cold bottle of Evian mineral water. She was aware that her life had become ridiculous. She spent too much time on her job, but also too much time by herself in her apartment, especially on weekends. It wasn't that she couldn't get dates. She was just turned off by men in general lately. The phone rang and she glanced at her wristwatch. It was 12:20. She snatched up the receiver. "Hampton speaking." "It's Chuck, Patsy. Really sorry to call so late. Is it okay? You awake?" "Sure, no problem, Chuck E. Cheese. I'm up with the other vampires. Yourself included, I guess." It was kind of late, but she was glad to hear from Chuck Hufstedler, who was a computer geek at the FBI in Washington. The two of them helped each other out sometimes, and she'd recently talked to him about the unsolved D.C. murders, especially the Jane Does. Chuck had told her that he was also in contact with Alex Cross, but Cross had trouble of his own right now. His fiancée had been kidnapped, and Patsy Hampton wondered if it had anything to do with the killings in Southeast. "I'm wide awake, Chuck. What's up?" You know anything about RPGs, Patsy?" he asked. "I know it stands for role-playing games, and let's see, there's a popular one called Dragons and Dungeons, or Dungeons and Dragons, whatever the order." "It's Dungeons and Dragons, or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Confession time, kiddo, I occasionally play an RPG myself. It's called Millennium's End. Very popular game, even with so-called adults. The characters in Millennium's End work for Black Eagle Security. It's a private organization of troubleshooters who hire out for investigative services around the world. The characters are all good guys, crusaders for good." "Uh-huh. Chuck, get to the damn point. It is around 12:30, pal." "Right. I am heartily sorry and deeply embarrassed, too. Anyway, there's a chat room online that I visited. It's called the Gamesters Chat Room, and it's on AOL. As I speak, there's a fascinating discussion going on about a new kind of game. It's more an anti-game, though. All the role-playing games I know are about good characters trying to conquer chaos and evil. The game under discussion has a couple of evil characters trying to overcome good. Specifically, Patsy, one of the characters is attacking and murdering women in the southeast part of D.C. Lots of lurid details on the murders. These aren't the actual players, but they know about the game. The game itself is probably protected. Thought you should know. The game is called The Four Horsemen." Patsy Hampton was definitely wide awake now. "I'm on it. Thanks, Chuck. Let's keep this between the two of us for the moment, okay, Chuck?" Yeah, okay." It took her a couple of minutes to log on to AOL, then get into the Gamesters chat room. She didn't participate, just read what the others had to say. This was interesting. She wondered if she had just stumbled onto her first big break in the Jane Doe case. The others in the room were named Viper, Landlocked, J-Boy, and Lancelot. They chattered on and on about the hottest fantasy games and cutting-edge magazines, which nearly succeeded in putting her to sleep. The Four Horsemen came up twice, but only in passing as a point of reference. Lancelot was the one who mentioned it. Chuck was right. These probably weren't the actual players, but they knew about the game somehow. The fantasy nerds were starting to wear really thin with her by 1:15. Finally, out of frustration, she typed out a message for the little shitheels. She called herself Sappho. "I came in late, but Horseman sounds like a neat kind of revolutionary game to me, Lancelot. Pretty audacious stuff, no?" Lancelot shot back. "Not really, Sappho. There's a lot of it going around lately. Anti-heroes, sickos, especially in vampire game circles." Hampton typed. "Haven't I read about murders like these in the newspapers? By the way, it's Sappho, like the poet." Lancelot replied, "Yeah, but lots of RPGs use current events. No biggie really, Sappho." Hampton grinned. He was an obnoxious little nerd, but she had him, for the moment anyway, and she needed him. How much did he know about the Four Horsemen? Could he be a player? She tried to peek at Lancelot's profile, but he had restricted access to it. "You're funny. Are you a player, Laugh-A-Lot, or just an art critic?" "I don't like the basic concept of horsemen. Anyway, it's a private game. Strictly private, encrypted. You know any of the players? I might like to try it out myself. There was no response to the question. Patsy thought maybe she'd pushed too hard, too fast. Damn, she should have known better. Damn. Oh, come back, Lancelot. Earth to Lancelot. I really would like to play the Four Horsemen, but I'm cool about it. No biggie. Lancelot? Patsy Hampton waited. And then Lancelot left the chat room. Lancelot was gone. And so was her connection to somebody playing a so-called fantasy game about committing gruesome murders in Washington. Murders that had really happened.
I returned to Washington during the first week of September, and I had never felt stranger in my own skin. I'd gone to Bermuda with my family and Christine, and now I was coming home without her. Whoever had taken Christine had contacted me only once. I missed her nearly every moment of every day, and it pained me to think about where she might still be. It was an unusually cool and windy day when I got back to the city. It almost seemed as if summer had suddenly changed to the middle of fall, as if I had been away much longer than I had. I had been in a fog of unreality in Bermuda, and it was nearly the same once I got back to D.C. It had never been this bad before. I was so lost, so unhinged, so battered. I wondered if Christine and I were part of a madman's elaborate delusion, what profilers call an escalating fantasy. If so, who was this madman? And where was he now? Was it the Weasel? Did I know him from some time in my past? The heartless, spineless bastard had communicated, "We have her." And that was it. No further word. Now only silence, which was deafening. I took a cab from the airport and remembered what had happened to Frank Odenkirk, who had innocently taken a cab one night in August and wound up murdered on Alabama Avenue near DuPont Park. I hadn't thought about the Odenkirk case during the past 3 weeks. I had rarely even had a thought about the Jane Doe murders while in Bermuda, but I was guiltily reminded of them now. Others had suffered painful losses because of the killer. I wondered if any progress had been made, and who in the department was running the case, at least the Odenkirk part of it. On the other hand, I didn't feel that I could work on any of the other unsolved murders right now. I felt my place was still in Bermuda. Sampson tried to push me. He did push me. He and I made the rounds of the streets of Southeast. We put the word out that we were looking for a purple and blue cab, possibly a gypsy. We canvassed door to door in the Shore neighborhood where Torrey Glover and Marion Cardinal had been found. Often we were still going at 10 or 11 at night. I didn't care. I couldn't sleep anyway. Sampson cared. He was my friend. "You're supposed to be working on the Odenkirk case, right?" "I'm not supposed to be working at all." The Heffy would be livid. "I kind of like that," Sampson said as we trudged along S Street late one evening. Sampson had lived in this neighborhood for years. He knew all the local hangarounds. "You talked to the police in Bermuda lately?" I nodded, and my eyes stared at a fixed point up ahead. Patrick Busby said the story of Christine's disappearance is off the front pages. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's probably bad. Sampson agreed. Takes the pressure off them. You going back down there? Not right away. But yeah, I have to go back. I have to find out what happened. He looked me in the eye. "Are you here with me right now? Are you here, sugar?" "Yeah, I'm here. Most of the time. I'm functioning okay." I pointed up at a nearby red brick building. That place would have a view of the front entryway into the girls' building. Any of those windows. Let's go back to work. Sampson nodded. "I'm here as long as you want to be." There was something about pounding the streets that appealed to me that night. We talked to everyone in the building that we could find at home, about half the apartments. Nobody had seen a purple and blue cab on the street. Nobody had seen Torrey or Marion either. Or so they said. "You see any connections anywhere?" I asked as we came down the steep stairs of a fourth-floor walk-up. "What do you see? What the hell am I missing?" "Not a thing, Alex. Nothing to miss. Weasel didn't leave a clue. Never does." We got back down to the entrance and met up with an elderly man carrying 3 clear plastic bags of groceries from Stop and Shop. "We're homicide detectives," I said to him. 2 young girls were murdered across the street." The man nodded. "Torrey and Marion. I know 'em. You want to know about that fella watching the building? He was sitting there most of the night, inside a slick, fancy black car," he said. "Mercedes, I think. You think maybe he's